My name is Allison Smith, and I'm 25 years old. I recently graduated from the University of California with a degree in fine arts. Life after graduation comes with its challenges, but my story wasn't just about the typical journey into adulthood. It was a journey through family legacy, betrayal, and finding the strength to face adversity. When I was little, my mother, Jessica Smith, was the center of my world. She was a talented baker and the owner of her own bakery. She was also meticulous when it came to business planning. She always looked ahead, making sure I would have a secure foundation. Even before her cancer diagnosis, she had secured both her future and mine. One of her most precious assets was the bakery she had built from nothing. She poured her heart and soul into making that shop successful. My mother passed away 4 years ago, leaving the bakery in my care. I can still hear her words, "Allison, this bakery isn't just a shop. It's our home, our roots. This will always be your place in the world." Even while fighting cancer, her primary concern was my future. She taught me everything about running the store, from managing employees to negotiating with suppliers. Mother's foresight was her way of expressing love, I realize now. That love continues to live within me to this day. Life, however, wasn't always smooth sailing. My parents' marriage ended after 10 years. When I was still young, my father, Edward Smith, decided to leave home to live with another woman. There were no heated arguments between the couple or courtroom battles that often accompany such situations. He simply said goodbye, quietly, and stepped into his new life. Dad quickly remarried a younger woman named Anne. Eventually, they had a daughter named Cameron. I would visit them occasionally, but I never felt like a member of that new family. Anne was always polite, but there was something distant about her demeanor. I could tell she treated me as a visitor, not as family. "Allison, would you like to stay for dinner?" she would always ask, but her tone conveyed that she expected, even hoped for, my refusal. Meanwhile, my father spent most of his time working. He claimed it was to support his family, but it was clear I wasn't included in that picture. Cameron was always at the center of my father's new family. I felt increasingly alienated watching and braid her hair or applaud her small accomplishments. Despite this, my relationship with my father maintained an awkward but consistent distance. He paid for my college tuition in one lump sum. Was it out of guilt or a sense of obligation? I often wondered. Either way, that was his form of involvement in my life. I accepted it without thinking too deeply about it. At the time, I believed it was the best choice for me. Little did I know that my mother's plans and my father's hidden intentions would create a storm I never saw coming. Losing my mother was the most painful event of my life. Jessica Smith wasn't just my mother, she was my greatest supporter, my cheerleader, the person who gave me courage to face the world. She died of cancer 4 years ago, just weeks before I started college. My world shattered completely when she left. The sense of loss was immeasurable, like part of myself had been torn away forever. For a long time, I couldn't focus on anything, and even getting out of bed was agonizing. During those first few weeks after Mom died, I was in a fog, unable to accept the reality of what had happened. That's when, unexpectedly, my father reached out to help. He moved into my house temporarily with Anne and Cameron. I was so overwhelmed with grief that I didn't even have the energy to question this arrangement. I could only feel grateful that someone was there with me. Dad would place his hand gently on my shoulder and tell me that they were all there for me. Anne would nod quietly with a carefully constructed expression on her face. And Cameron would look around the house with curious eyes. She observed every corner of the house as if she were touring a museum. Their presence, minimal as it was, provided me with some comfort. Anne took over meal preparation and housework, while Dad helped with the complicated procedures that follow losing a loved one. Cameron would sit next to me and talk about school and her friends. Those conversations were small reprieves, temporarily distracting me from my heavy sorrow. It was a strange feeling, but somehow those moments were also comforting. As my college start date approached, I faced a difficult decision. What should I do with this house, as I was going to live in a dormitory at the university? Selling the house was absolutely unthinkable for me. This was the precious legacy my mother had worked so hard to build for us, her final gift to me. Yet leaving it empty for 4 years didn't seem like a wise choice either. I worried about maintenance issues and the feeling of abandonment that would settle into the walls. That's when my father approached me with a suggestion that seemed to solve everything. One morning, as we were drinking coffee together, Dad suggested that they should live in the house while I was away at college. He assured me they would pay all the utilities and maintenance costs so I wouldn't have to worry about anything. His voice carried a note of genuine concern that touched me. Just at that moment, and chimed in while flipping pancakes on the stove, the sizzling sound and warm aroma filling the kitchen with domestic comfort. She insisted it would be best for everyone, that Cameron loved the house, and that they would take proper care of it. Her tone was so convincing, so maternal. The proposal seemed to make perfect sense at the time, a solution that benefited everyone involved. I accepted their offer with immense gratitude and left for college, my heart lightened by the belief that my mother's house and its precious memories would be carefully preserved in my absence. College life quickly became a whirlwind of classes, assignments, and late-night study sessions that often left me exhausted but fulfilled. Still, whenever I returned home during breaks, I felt like I was stepping into a completely different world, a sanctuary from the academic pressures. Each time I came back, the house provided me with a sense of security and reminded me of my roots, the familiar creaks of the floorboards and the way sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows brought back memories of my mother. After several visits home, I began to notice some unexpected changes that stirred a mix of confusion and warmth within me. The family atmosphere in my mother's house was different than before, transforming in ways I hadn't anticipated. During my first vacation back, Anne welcomed me with a warm smile and had prepared a home-cooked meal that filled the house with comforting aromas. She greeted me with genuine warmth, telling me she had made my favorite lasagna, as she set the table with careful attention to detail. She acted as if she had known my preferences all along, which surprised me given our previously distant relationship. Cameron pulled me into her room with childlike excitement to show me her latest artwork, her small hand warm in mine. Her eyes sparkled as she eagerly asked if she should add more blue to her painting, a simple question that somehow bridged the gap between us. It was a different kind of interaction than we'd had before, more intimate and genuine than I had ever experienced with her. I could tell she was treating me like a real sister, not just a distant relative who occasionally visited. As time passed, coming home became more than just an opportunity for rest. It became a chance to experience what having a complete family might feel like. I began to feel like I was part of this family too, a feeling I had longed for since my mother's passing. During Christmas break, we decorated the house together, the scent of pine needles and cinnamon creating a festive atmosphere I hadn't experienced since Mom died. I remember when Anne said those sparkly decorations were tacky, but I laughed and defended them, saying, "They're classic, what's wrong with that?" My father lifted Cameron up to place the star at the very top of the Christmas tree. His face had such a happy smile on it. It was as if this was the family arrangement he had always wanted. Those moments felt warm and genuine to me. Just like a real family. During summer break, we spent even longer, peaceful times together. Cameron and I would relax at the town pool or watch multiple movies while munching on popcorn. And even invited me to her book club once. We talked about romance novel plots and laughed together with the group. One night, Anne told her friends that my opinions were really insightful. I felt unexpectedly accepted in that moment. My father also became more actively involved with me than before. He would join us for dinner and show genuine interest in my classes. One evening, he told me that my mother would surely be proud of me. His expression was full of emotion when he said it. Those accumulated moments made me think that perhaps this wasn't just a place I visited anymore, that maybe I had truly become a member of this family. Gradually, my perspective on Anne and Cameron changed. Anne, who had once been cold and distant, had now become like a real mother figure. She always checked on how I was doing and told me not to worry, to just relax and enjoy my stay. Cameron was always energetic, bringing life to the house with her constant chatter. Each time she came to me for advice, I began to feel my role as a big sister for the first time. The house itself was changing bit by bit too. New curtains showing Anne's influence, a different dining table. Yet all these changes harmonized with the warmth my mother had established. It seemed we were building a new kind of family while still honoring the past. Then came my college graduation. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life. For years of hard work, late-night studying, and dreams for the future. Finally, I had achieved what I'd worked for. After graduation, I secured a job at a local company, which meant returning to my hometown. I felt such relief and joy knowing I would be living once again in the home where Mom and I had shared so many memories. Little did I know how fragile that happiness truly was. I never imagined that the family foundation we had built would crumble beneath the weight of hidden truths. Mom's house, my house, was waiting for me. It was finally the place where I could settle down and begin building my career. On a sunny afternoon in June, I returned home at last. The sun poured down, creating that warm, brilliant light that fills you with hope and possibility. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, I couldn't help but smile at the familiar sight of my childhood home. The garden was well maintained, but Mom's roses looked somewhat different than I remembered. They had changed from the way they looked when Mom had tended them with such loving care. The house itself appeared largely unchanged from the outside. Yet the small alterations Aunt had made over the years had subtly shifted its atmosphere. New curtains, shutters painted in a different color, little things that added up. Still, the house felt welcoming, and I couldn't wait to get inside and return to my own room. I dragged my suitcase to the front door, pulled out my key, and inserted it into the lock. The key wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again. I jiggled it slightly while trying to turn it, but it still wouldn't open. What on earth? I muttered in confusion, then knocked firmly on the door. There must have been some mistake. If they had changed the locks, they should have given me a spare key. After a moment, the door opened, and there stood Anne. Her expression shifted from initial surprise to immediate discomfort in the span of a heartbeat. She had flour on her apron, apparently she had been cooking. Allison. Her voice held a hesitant quality I'd never heard before. Allison, why are you still here? She asked, ignoring my bewilderment as I pushed my suitcase through the doorway. Why am I here? Because I live here, I said, looking around the living room. This was supposed to be my house, but somehow it looked different. New furniture, unfamiliar carpets, small changes that collectively created a sense of alienation in what should have been my most familiar space. More importantly, why did you change the locks? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Before Aunt could answer, my father appeared from the back of the house. His face was pale, his movements awkward and hesitant. Behind him stood Cameron with an expression that suggested she wanted to say something, but she kept her lips tightly sealed. Allison. My father said, placing his hand on his forehead. Let's talk in the study, he suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. I followed my father into the study that my mother had once used, a sacred space in my memory. Her books and certificates still adorned the walls, but the air felt heavy, as if the room itself was trying to communicate something ominous. My father closed the door and extended his slightly trembling hand toward me, speaking in a low voice that I had to strain to hear. "Allison, there's something I need to tell you," he began, the weight of his words already pressing down on me. He paused, his eyes avoiding mine. Then he continued slowly, each word measured and deliberate. "Anne believes that this house belongs to her," he finally admitted. I stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "What are you talking about? Mom left this house to me." "It's in her will," I insisted. My father nodded while averting his gaze, a gesture that confirmed my fears before he even spoke. "I know that. But I never told Anne that. I told her that the house was originally mine and that I had generously given it to your mother during the divorce," he confessed. The moment those words registered, I felt betrayed, breathless and disoriented. "You've been lying for 4 years?" I asked, my voice trembling as I tried to control my emotions. "You let Anne believe this house was yours? When it's actually mine?" I pressed, my voice becoming unsteady. My father's shoulders slumped, showing he knew he couldn't defend his actions. "I didn't think it was a big deal. You were away at college, and we needed a place to stay. I thought it was temporary," he explained, his words sounding empty between us. "Temporary? This is my house. My mother's house. And you made Anne believe it was hers?" I exclaimed, my voice rising with each word. "I was going to tell her eventually," my father replied, his voice barely audible in the tense atmosphere of the study. There was no truth in his words, just hollow excuses that echoed in the space between us. "When exactly were you planning to tell her?" "It's been 4 years already," I challenged him, my hands trembling with anger and betrayal. Just then, Anne's sharp voice cut through the air from outside the door. "Is everything all right? Is there a problem?" she called out, her tone laced with suspicion. The air in the room became thick with tension, and in that moment, I realized something profound. I couldn't allow this lie to continue any longer. It was eating away at the very foundation of what I thought was becoming my family. I chose to say nothing for the time being, hoping against hope that my father would keep his promise and resolve this situation himself. But soon enough, I noticed something strange and unsettling happening around me. Anne's attitude toward me had grown noticeably colder, like winter frost creeping across a window pane. It started with subtle little jabs, things so small I couldn't really call her out about them directly. She maintained a veneer of politeness, but her words carried hidden thorns. I remember how she told me she had reorganized the pantry to make it more functional, adding with a smile that I probably hadn't noticed because I'd been so busy at college. Behind her smile, there was unmistakable sarcasm, a clear message that this was her domain, not mine. That wasn't all. One morning, I discovered my favorite blouse ruined in the washing machine, streaked with bright pink stains that would never come out. "Oh my goodness, how terrible," she exclaimed when I confronted her. And dramatically gasped and feigned genuine surprise, but her performance was too rehearsed to be believable. She suggested that perhaps she had made a mistake sorting the laundry, her voice sounding artificial and hollow. Then she casually remarked that these things happen when a house becomes too crowded, dismissing the ruined blouse as if it were nothing. Even Cameron, who once looked forward to spending time with me, had become cold and distant. She would avert her eyes whenever I entered a room, as if I were a stranger rather than family. When talking to her friends on the phone, she referred to me as that girl, never by my name. One night, I overheard her whispering into her phone, saying, "Mom told me it's so weird that she's still living here." Those words cut deeper than I expected, piercing straight through my heart like a well-aimed arrow. I watched as Anne's snide remarks gradually transformed into outright hostility. One evening, as I was brewing coffee, she cornered me in the kitchen, arms crossed, fixing me with an icy stare that made my skin prickle. She asked if I had considered moving out, her tone deceptively light but her words carrying unmistakable pressure. She reminded me that I would be starting work soon, suggesting it was time for me to consider independence since I was a grown woman now. I gripped my cup tightly, struggling to maintain my composure as emotions churned inside me. I told her that I had already discussed staying here for a while with my father. At my words, Anne's lips pressed into a tight line, her disapproval as clear as daylight. She started to say something, then changed her mind, turning on her heel and leaving the kitchen without another word. But even without speaking, her actions conveyed a message that was all too clear. I wasn't welcome in what had once been my own home. The next morning, I discovered the living room had been completely rearranged. My mother's favorite vase, a cherished memento of her life and taste, had been relegated to a dusty shelf in the corner of the room. When I asked about it, Anne simply shrugged and said it didn't match the new atmosphere she was creating. I felt a surge of resentment but kept my mouth shut, knowing that arguing would only play into her hands. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier with each passing day, and continued to demonstrate in countless ways that I was not welcome there. Cameron followed her mother's lead, treating me with the same cold shoulder that had replaced her once warm demeanor. What hurt the most was that my father pretended not to notice any of it. My father, who had once been my ally, now avoided even making eye contact with me. He started leaving the house early and returning late, a new pattern that showed his discomfort. He made excuses about being busy with work, but I understood the real message. He didn't want to be in this house with its suffocating atmosphere. I was beginning to lose my place in my own home, feeling like a stranger in the space my mother had created for me. Dinner times became silent battlefields, where tensions played out without words. Anne would deliberately prepare meals for only 3 people, and when I sat at the table, she would feign surprise, as if my presence was unexpected. She would remark that she thought I had eaten out, her tone light but her eyes cold and unwelcoming. Cameron would giggle at her mother's words, while my father said nothing, silently moving his knife and fork as if the tension wasn't thick enough to cut with them. With each passing day, my sense of isolation grew deeper, a feeling I hadn't experienced since the days following my mother's death. Being in that house began to feel like a crushing weight pressing down on my very soul. This wasn't just about Anne anymore, my father too was denying my existence through his silence. I tried to focus on my work, throwing myself into my new career with everything I had. I reached out to old friends and tried to engage with the outside world, desperate to forget the situation at home. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, every time I returned to that house, a leaden heaviness settled deep in my heart. The relationship between us had become so fragile it seemed ready to shatter at any moment. And they were clearly trying to push me out of what was rightfully my home. Then came that Saturday morning. Normally, the house would be filled with the aroma of baking pastries in the kitchen, loud music blasting from Cameron's room, and my father watching sports on television. But that morning was eerily quiet. It felt as if the entire house was holding its breath. I got out of bed and made my way downstairs. I called out for Anne and my father, but received no answer. The kitchen was unnaturally pristine. It wasn't just clean, there was absolutely no sign it had been used since the night before. The living room too was perfectly arranged, not even a cushion out of place. When I checked the shoe rack by the front door, I noticed that everyone's shoes were gone. Looking outside, I saw my father's car was missing as well. I pulled out my phone to check if anyone had left me a message. Nothing. Frowning, I dialed my father's number. There wasn't even a ring, it went straight to voicemail. I tried several times with the same result. Finally, reluctantly, I called Anne. On the 4th ring, she answered. Her voice was sharp, making no attempt to hide her irritation. She simply said, "What?" In the background, I could hear the sound of waves and faint tropical music. "Where is everyone?" I asked, unable to hide my shock. When I woke up this morning, there was nobody in the house. on the other end of the line, and gave a little chuckle. But there was no warmth in it, just a cold, cutting laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, I forgot to mention," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We're in the Maldives right now. First-class flight, luxurious resort. We have everything we need." I caught my breath, the revelation hitting me like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. And replied with shocking casualness, telling me they didn't want me to come along. In that moment, everything suddenly became crystal clear to me, the missing pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. "Wait, did you think I would come along and make you pay for me?" I stammered, my words stumbling over each other. A mixture of disbelief and anger swelled in my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think clearly. "What are you talking about?" "That's not the point," she shot back. "You all disappeared without saying a word." "You're so annoying," she stated coldly, her words like ice through the phone. She continued ruthlessly, saying she was sick of the situation, accusing me of squatting in their house and taking advantage of them. She claimed I was acting as if it were my own home. Those words struck me with the force of a physical slap. But Anne wasn't finished with her verbal assault. She went on, saying that while my father might overlook things, she couldn't anymore. She asked if I realized how embarrassing it was for a grown woman to continue living in someone else's house. I clenched my fist so tightly my nails dug into my palm, fighting to maintain my composure. "And so?" I managed to ask, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "She instructed me to pack my things and be out of the house by the time they returned. She warned that appealing to my father would be useless because he agreed with her, adding that he was simply too cowardly to say it himself." "What did you say?" I whispered, hardly believing what I was hearing. Anne's final words were that she had already blocked my phone number, followed by a dismissive goodbye. "Have a nice life." Beep. Beep. The call ended abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. I stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. The phone screen darkened in my trembling hands, the conversation replaying mercilessly in my mind. But something changed within me in that moment. It was anger that finally took over. Fierce and unwavering anger that burned through my veins. This was my house. My mother's house. I decided I was done being considerate. I took a deep breath, feeling my resolve solidify with each passing second. And then I began to act without hesitation. First, I gathered all their belongings from around the house. Anne's expensive clothes, Cameron's school supplies, my father's golf clubs. I packed everything. I stuffed them into boxes and suitcases, then carried them all to the garage. With each item I put away, I felt a little more strength returning to me. It was as if I was reclaiming my house with my own hands, taking back what they had slowly stolen from me. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. I asked if they could change the locks immediately, my voice surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. The locksmith arrived within an hour and replaced every lock in the house. I clutched the new keys tightly in my hand, feeling their weight as proof that this house was truly mine. The cost was substantial, but I didn't care about the money. When the locksmith left and I closed the door behind him, I finally exhaled a breath of relief. This house was mine. I would never let anyone take it from me again. Then came Friday afternoon. Returning home from work, I found familiar cars parked in front of my house. They had come back. And my father and Cameron were standing in front of the entrance, surrounded by the luggage and boxes I had moved to the garage. Anne's face was flushed with anger as she confronted my father, wildly gesticulating with her hands. Cameron stood a little distance away, arms crossed in obvious displeasure. My father, true to form, remained silent and avoided eye contact with both of them. When I got out of my car, and immediately raised her voice. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing and why I had changed the locks. She rushed toward me, shouting that this was their house and that I had no right to lock them out. I walked toward the entrance in silence, ignoring her completely. She followed behind me, raising her voice even more. She threatened to call the police, claiming what I had done was a crime. I stopped and turned around slowly. Surprisingly, my mind was completely calm. No, and, I stated firmly, my voice calm yet resolute. This is not your house. It never was. I watched her face stiffen, the realization slowly dawning on her that the power dynamic had shifted. This house was left to me by my mother. It's written in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it. But that permission has now ended. Anne's face contorted with shock and anger, her carefully maintained facade crumbling before my eyes. She whirled around to face my father, her body language desperate and demanding. She begged my dad to tell me I was lying, insisting that this was their house. My father kept his eyes down, staring at the ground by his feet, his shoulders slumped in defeat. After what felt like an eternity of silence, he finally spoke. Allison is telling the truth, he admitted, his voice barely more than a hoarse whisper. The transformation in Anne's face was immediate and dramatic. You're lying, she screamed, glaring at my father with such intensity one thought he might crumble under her gaze. She reminded him how he had always told her this house was his, demanding to know if they hadn't been living in his house all along, if they hadn't been doing Allison a favor. My father stood there speechless, unable to defend himself against the torrent of her accusations. And turned back to me then, forcing a desperate smile onto her face that didn't reach her eyes. Allison, please, she pleaded, her voice suddenly sweet and cajoling in a way that made my skin crawl. She tried to remind me of all the wonderful memories we had supposedly created together, the Christmas dinners, the book club evenings, insisting this was a family home and that if we just talked things through. No. There's nothing to discuss, I cut her off mid-sentence, refusing to be manipulated any further. Your belongings are in the garage. Take them and leave. In that moment, the false smile vanished from Anne's face as if it had been wiped away. Her eyes harbored nothing but hatred now, cold and unmasked. You ungrateful girl, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She demanded to know if I had any idea how much they had helped me, expressing disbelief that I could do this to them. I replied quietly but firmly, looking her straight in the eye. I was never treated like family. And furthermore, I delivered my final statement with absolute clarity, wanting no misunderstanding. This is my mother's house. It was never yours. And then, finally, my father stepped forward, making one last attempt. Allison, please, he begged, his voice trembling with emotion. I remember when my father pleaded with me, admitting he had made mistakes, but reminding me we were family. He asked if we couldn't resolve this through discussion, begging for just a little more time to stay in the house. I looked straight into his eyes and shook my head, feeling a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I told him it wasn't possible, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment. I reminded him how he had lied to Anne and to me, how he had silently watched as and erased all traces of my mother from this house. He had pretended not to see, remaining silent through it all, and I couldn't allow it to continue any longer. Anne made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. She raised her voice, her anger fully exposed as she threatened me. She asked if I really thought I could get away with this, vowing to take legal action if necessary to reclaim the house. I opened the door and stepped inside my home, feeling the threshold beneath my feet like a boundary between my past and future. Then I turned back and quietly told her to go ahead and try whatever she wanted. Without hesitation, I closed the door firmly behind me, the sound of it latching providing a satisfying finality. Through the window, I watched them arguing as they loaded their belongings into their cars. and was shouting with rage. Cameron was crying, and my father just stood there, looking utterly defeated. When the engine started and the car slowly pulled away from the house, I felt the pressure in my chest dissolving. The house was mine again, truly mine in every sense of the word. After they left, the house was remarkably quiet. But there was a comfortable peace in that silence that I hadn't felt in years. I no longer needed to brace myself for Anne's sarcastic comments or sideways glances. My home had finally returned to me. And in that quietness, I realized something important. This house wasn't just my mother's anymore. It was mine too, my place to begin a new life, my sanctuary. Cutting ties with my father wasn't easy at all. He tried to contact me multiple times in the weeks that followed. He would call from new numbers, leaving messages of apology and explanation. But I never responded to any of his attempts. In one message, he told me he loved me and had only wanted to keep peace in the family. His voice sounded hollow, without any real sincerity. I knew that peace built on lies isn't true peace at all. I had decided I would no longer sacrifice my dignity to be someone else's convenience. Anne never contacted me, which wasn't surprising given her attitude. But Cameron's silence weighed heavily on my heart. She was still young, just a girl caught in the crossfire of her parents' decisions. Yet I knew deep in my soul that cutting ties with toxic relationships was necessary for me, no matter how painful. After they were gone, I reclaimed the house piece by piece, methodically restoring what had been taken from me. I rearranged the furniture back to its original placement and repainted the walls in warm colors that spoke of comfort and belonging. I planted new roses in the garden, carefully selecting the colors my mother had always loved. Each task served a dual purpose, bringing back memories of my mother while simultaneously making this house truly mine again. My work became another pillar of support in my life. Though demanding, my job provided a fulfilling sense of purpose and direction. I developed close relationships with my colleagues, and for the first time in years, I experienced that wonderful feeling of truly belonging somewhere. Joanne, who worked on my team, became a particularly dear friend. During lunch breaks, we shared our dreams and future plans. Our laughter together helped heal emotional wounds I didn't even know I had. But rebuilding my mother's bakery was my most important project and meant everything to me. The shop had remained closed since her death. I hadn't been ready to deal with the grief it contained. After months of planning, preparation, and late nights of hard work, I finally reopened those doors. It represented both my mother's legacy and my future path. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the space, wrapping around me like an embrace. In that moment, I remembered my mother's words with perfect clarity. This wasn't just a store, it was my roots, my sanctuary. It was what my mother had built with her own hands and heart. And now, it was mine to continue. Times of reflection come frequently now, moments when I look back on everything that happened. The betrayal, the loss, the heartache, the departure of those I once called family. But I chose not to let those memories hold me back anymore. They were just one part of my life, not my entire life. From that experience, I learned to value myself, set clear boundaries, and embrace the courage to start fresh. Life doesn't always follow a straight or easy path. Sometimes it squeezes your heart when you least expect it. But here, living among echoes of my mother, I feel genuine hope blossoming within me. Mom always looked toward the future, and she instilled that same strength in me. I understand now, more than ever, that this was her expression of love. Even when betrayed by those I trusted, even when I nearly lost everything, I found the strength to move forward. This bakery is mine. This life is mine. And I will continue to build this life beautifully. For my mother. For myself. And for the future she always hoped I would have.